Greetings, Morehouse family and community. My name is Leah Krike. I serve as Professor of English and Director of the Howard Thurman Honors Program here at Morehouse College. I am pleased to participate in today's Crown Forum on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the International Conference on Caribbean Literature. For 20 years, Morehouse College has hosted this conference of esteemed scholars and authors throughout the Caribbean. Normally, we are in a Caribbean nation at one of the universities there. However, this time we are here at home via virtual streaming, and we are pleased to celebrate on our home turf. I would like to let you know that this program has been around for 20 years because of the dedication and tenacity of our esteemed Dr. Melvin Ramin, who's been a professor of English here at the college for over 40 years. He is a renowned author and critic, and he has formerly served as the chair of the Department of English. Dr. Ramin will introduce our guest speaker, so I bring him to you now so that you can meet him. Dr. Ramin.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, especially to Morehouse community and all of the audience that may be watching us to celebrate ICCL. We are very, very pleased and honored to have in our presence today Ms. Edwidge Danticat, whom we teach at this school, whom the students seem to love, students and faculty, and whose presence sends even a clearer message to the conference world that ICCL only deals with the best. Ms. Danticat is the author of numerous books, including Clear of the Sea Light, a New York Times notable book, Brother, I'm Dying, a National Book Critics Circle Award winner and National Book Award finalist, Breath, Eyes, Memory, an Oprah Club book selection, Quick Crack, a National Book Award finalist, The Farming of Bones, an American Book Award winner, The Dew Breaker, a PEN/Faulkner Award finalist and winner of the inaugural Story Prize, and Everything Inside, a Reese's Book Club pick and winner of the Story Prize. The recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship, she has been published in the New Yorker, the New York Times, and elsewhere. She lives in Miami. It gives me profound pleasure and a great, great honor to present to you on behalf of the International Conference on Caribbean Literature and the Morehouse College Founding Day, Ms. Edwidge Danticat.
Thank you, Dr. Ramin, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you to Dr. Krike, to Morehouse College and the Crown Forum, and to the International Conference on Caribbean Literature. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. The theme of the forum, Catharsis, Healing, and Regeneration in Caribbean Literature, is one that hits home particularly strongly for me. My homeland is again in search of healing and regeneration as we speak today, after the summer that we have had with the assassination of the president, the hurricane, that grace that followed a 7.2 earthquake in the southern peninsula. However, the climate crisis will demand healing and regeneration from all of us. It is raining behind me today, reminding me of the blessings of our islands, which also sometimes ends up being our curse. Our geography gives us year-round sun and beautiful beaches, but more and more in the age of extreme weather and climate change, we are on the front line of destruction and in line for regeneration, as we have always done. We are a people, seems to be what we've been saying for generations, to our colonizers and invaders, colonists, and imperialists who seemed intent on destroying us. And now, more than ever, Mother Nature at times. We're a people, the Arawaks and the Tainos might have said, even as they died trying to prove it. We have inherited the word hurricane even from them. Much has been terribly lost, and Grenada, Lord wrote at the end of her 1983 visit, but not all, not the spirit of the people. So going from more broadly to a personal experience of journeys and people, I want to just read before we start our wonderful conversation a short piece. I wanted to read for this forum Work in Progress, because I too am going through a kind of process of a personal regeneration after the year that we've all had together, the 2020, this year of the pandemic, which has also been embroiled with the pandemic of racism. So this is a piece that I wrote during the summer of 2020 that I would like to share with all of you before we start our conversation. It's called Voyage la Continue, Our Journey Continues. It's about writing and mothers and daughters. My 15-year-old daughter, Mira, is taking a summer writing class online. Taught by the writer Erica Cardwell, the class is called Writing the Self. Mira and I are both won over by the beautiful description. Imagine the essay is a body of water, far-flung and teeming in the distance, and you, the writer, is alone on shore. Will you enter the water? I wish I could take this class, I tell Mira. What I mean is, I wish I could have taken this class when I was her age. I have read most of the assigned essays, and I decide to revisit some of them, which I read aloud to Mira. We read When the Dead Awaken, writing as revision by the poet Adrienne Rich. I have been looking for something more concrete than my own enthusiasm to convince my daughter that this class is an incredible gift, especially in the midst of a global pandemic and racial justice protest, at a time when we are all, writers and non-writers alike, searching for renewal, searching for the right words to describe our unique personal state, as well as the overall human condition. Then I come across Adrienne Rich's description, writing is renaming, which I take as a calling for renewal. Writing is renaming. We then read Audre Lorde's Poetry is Not a Luxury, where Lorde reminds us that there are no new pains. We have felt them all already. In an August 30th, 1979 interview between the two women, Lorde cites her choral poem, Need a Call for Black Women Voices, which is about the frequent silence around the lives and deaths of murdered Black women and girls. How much of this truth can I bear, she wrote. How much of this truth can I bear to see and still live unblinded? How much of this pain can I use? When I asked my daughter what she's writing for Miss Cardwell's class, she demurs and tells me that her first piece is about a tree she and her friends used to love to sit under during recess in elementary school. The same tree where that boy hit you in the forehead with a rock, I ask. That boy hitting her on a forehead with a rock contributed to her developing a condition called morphia au cou de sable, in which it seemed as though the two sides of her beautiful African forehead were splitting apart. I'm not going to write about that, she says. She will be writing about digging for worms under that tree with her girlfriend, she said, most of whom now go to different schools and have different friends. Midway through the essay class, while going through a box of old things, I find a wooden machete my mother gave me a few years before she died, a memento she bought while on a Caribbean cruise. I tell my daughter that I might write about my mother's wooden machete. I tell her that I see that machete as a symbol of the kind of strength that will help us all survive these challenging times too. I'm also writing about the time when Mira was 6 years old and we took my mother to the airport after a visit with us in Miami. Taking my mother to the airport and watching her leave always reminds me of my first concrete childhood Haitian Caribbean memory, which was of being peeled off my mother's body on the day she left Haiti for the United States when I was 4 years old, leaving me in the care of my aunt and uncle in Port-au-Prince for 8 years. That day, as Mira and I watched my mother merge into the crowd, heading towards her gate at the Miami airport, Mira screamed, "Mama," at the top of her voice. My mother turned around and stared at us. She seemed relieved that there was nothing wrong with either Mira or me. As other travelers were dashing around her, my mother took a few steps in our direction, then stopped. She seemed to want to walk back to us, but knew she could not, just as she could not walk back to me so long ago. Coming back to us now would mean just postponing another journey, another goodbye. I asked Mira if she remembered what happened that day. She remembers us taking my mother to the airport a bunch of times, she says, but does not remember ever calling after her. But she does recall another moment at the same place. Once, while my family and I were waiting to board a flight to New York with my mother went to look for a restroom and accidentally walked past security, leaving the boarding area without her boarding pass or her cell phone. When our plane began boarding, Mira and I went looking for her and found her pleading in her somewhat hesitant English with an impatient TSA officer to let her back in, like so many have asked before, to let them back in, or at least to accompany her to the gate and to us. She looked so scared, my daughter remembers, like she thought she'd never see us again, like I thought I would never see her again so long ago. I had also feared that we might never see my mother again, or that she might end up on the wrong flight to some distant country, or as an eternal ghost in the airport, passing everyone by. The words my mother would later use to recount to her friends the experience of being lost at the airport now trickled back into my mind, as they seemed to be the dream of so many migrants before her, before us. They still sound too like the elevator pitch of a much more elaborate tale. M'pedi, yo jwenn mwen, voyage la kontinue. I am lost, they find me, the journey continues. Recalling my mother's words, I know that our stories will always remain our transit points and our forever shore. We will be lost, we will be found, and our journeys will continue. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your new work with us. And our journey does continue here with ICCL. You were so on point in all that you spoke about in terms of healing and regeneration in Caribbean literature. That has been the hallmark of your work. So we are so very glad that you are with us on this occasion. You know, we hosted the ICCL conference in Haiti in 2006.
Wow.
And one thing that I make note of, and others also, was the spirit of the people. Despite all that we claim to know about the traumas and the difficulties there, we did not experience seeing a person who had a bitter face or a countenance of anger or anything. There was nothing that showed distress in their being. The other thing that we noted was the artistry throughout the country. No matter where you went, there was just vibrant art, even on doorknobs and in very unusual places. So it was good that we were able to go there. I don't know that we will ever be able to go back as a group, but we certainly hope so. But your literature definitely shows us what we saw. You know, you juxtapose the traumas, the difficulties, the political angst, but yet the characters in your work are unscathed in their spirit and in their soul.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I do hope you will, I hope and pray that you will have an opportunity to go back, and I know that there people will be waiting to welcome you all with open arms when the time is right.
Well, let's hope it is soon.
Indeed.
So the other thing we wanted to discuss, the pedagogy of your work is ever present here at Morehouse. You are part of the literary canon in our English department in English composition. We have one of your short stories in our English composition text. Dr. Ramin, of course, uses your work primarily with The Farming of Bones this semester in his Caribbean novel course. And even in our cinema, television, and emerging media studies program, your work is explored. And I wanted you to kind of share with us, because, as I said, we're faculty and students who utilize your work. What is one thing one strategy of writing, composition, and analysis, contextual analysis in particular, that you hope that we would remember and impart to our students?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you. Thank you, Morehouse. Thank you to both of you and Dr. Ramin for teaching the work. I remember, Toni Morrison talking about The Bluest Eye, and after it was published, what keeps this work alive for a lot of us is the fact that it is taught. So I'm very grateful to Morehouse and to all of you for that honor and privilege. What I would say is I see my work as part of, of course, I want people to enjoy the work. That's number one. I want it to be engaging and enjoyable. I want it to be something that young people can talk to one another about. I want them to discover the pleasure of it as well. And in addition to that, I would love for my work to be read in the larger context of deconstructing a lot of sort of stereotypes and mythology, at least to complicate certain ideas that people have about Haiti. Often, I think in Morehouse is such an ideal place for that to be considered. All these sort of these overlapping histories that we have, right? And the fact that, for example, at some point, folks wanted to migrate to Haiti because the founders of Haiti, when people were still enslaved elsewhere, they decided that if anybody lands in Haiti who is enslaved, then you are free there. Like the people were going to Haiti, and Caitlin Greenidge wrote a wonderful novel called Liberté about a group of African Americans who settled in Haiti after post-revolution. So really, I would love it would be wonderful to sort of have the history around the work, for the work to be contextualized, and in a place like Morehouse, to be framed in terms of our commonalities, right? Or these, there are these writers from the Harlem Renaissance who went to Haiti. Langston Hughes was friends with one of the great writers of Haiti, Jacques Romain. Their work influenced one another, and Langston Hughes and Mercer Cook translated Masters of the Deuce. Or O'Neill Hurston wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God in Haiti. I think all these overlapping, so that we're read sort of together as people in the African diaspora who are on this journey together. And I would love, like, when people are done reading me, to go explore further other works also by Haitian writers.
You're so right. You know, our honors program students annually have a reading retreat, and we read Caitlin Greenwich's work this year, Liberty, and it was such a wonderful way to look at Haiti in a new context. And she definitely writes in the tradition that you have established, and it continues, and we will continue at Morehouse in the ways that you mentioned to us. I would like to introduce you to some of our students who have read your work and have questions. They are members of the Howard Thurman Honors Program. And when they come on, they will introduce themselves. We have a unique way of Morehouse students introduce themselves. And perhaps we can continue this conversation further, hearing their questions, comments, and perspectives.
Good morning, Ms. Danticat. The students here at Morehouse College, we are certainly grateful for this opportunity to engage with you, and we are appreciative of your literary contribution. I am George Anthony Pratt, a third-year history and religion double major from Jacksonville, Florida. Also, thank you for sharing the new work with us. It reminded me of the theme of mother and daughter relationships in Breath, Eyes, Memory, specifically when you explore the relationship between women and state-sanctioned violence, in which Black women's bodies become a site of struggle. This leads me to my question. In the short story Without Inspection, readers are introduced to Arnold, who of course flees to the US and is rescued by his future lover, Darlene. When thinking about his voyage and untimely plunge to death, I was reminded of the recent images of Haitians being whipped by Border Patrol on horseback into the Rio Grande and the existential threat that freedom poses to the Black body. Can you discuss your treatment of the Black body as a lens to address Haitian identity?
Thank you so much for that wonderful question, which actually in your question, you traveled such a large historical space. The Black body, of course, so much has been written about the Black body and sort of the Black body, George Floyd's body, Breonna Taylor's body, but also Charles Malpéral's body, who was a man who, during the US occupation of Haiti, was executed and pinned to a door by US Marines, right? So it's a very long history, which these images from the border recently, the migrating Black body, which is treated very differently than other migrating bodies because, and we saw this at the border because as much as, you know, it seemed like there were so many people at the border, Haitian migration is only a relatively small percentage of people who are coming through the border. But when we have these images for certain people, it's triggering to have images of a mass group of Black people at their border, because the Black body is always, you know, I wrote a piece some years ago, so the Black body in motion, right, is seen as some kind of weapon, and the history, you know, of our region, certainly of Black bodies as a menace. No body is seen more menacing historically than Haitian bodies, right? In the sense that the Haitian Revolution, when in our hemisphere, you know, Haiti and the United States were the two first, you know, free republics in this area. Haiti, through a revolution, were the first place in the world where Black people, you know, overtook the people who owned them and started their own state. And immediately Haitians were isolated for that. They were stigmatized. You know, Thomas Jefferson called us cannibals. So you see how it's sort of like this thread throughout history. And migration is going to be, and I talked a little bit in the beginning, migration is going to be more and more of a global phenomenon, right? There are going to be more people from less advantaged places coming to places of more. Now it's going, you know, in Haiti's case, it's always been racialized in the sense that Haitians were held at Guantanamo Bay before terrorism suspects were. So, and people who've worked there, they were kept in these small boxes. People were treated, they were separated, people were separated from their families. So there are these historical tropes that seem to repeat themselves in the migrating Haitian body. You even see images of, we saw the images of the whips, right, in the Rio Grande, but there are also images of Mexican soldiers raiding those hotels where people are staying, the migrants, refugees are staying, or just confronting them. And that's not even discussed. So the Black migrating body, especially embodied with the history that Haiti has, the history of revolution that it's been constantly punished for, is seen, it's all over as a threat. And also, well, at the same time, Haitians are not being, there's always this meddling, these interventions that are not allowing Haitians at home to determine their own fate. So it's a very complex situation, but I also want us to frame it, to see it in the global context of choices that a lot of states will have to make when, something like 65 million people in the world are stateless. And that, in a way, is a nation of its own, a nation without borders of migrating bodies, a lot of which will be Black and brown bodies. And that's one of the things I was also trying to capture in one person in Without Inspection. And without inspection is an interesting term too, because it literally means that you entered a place without seeing an immigration official, which is like you're not in the place at all. It's like a sort of a legal term of erasure.
Good morning, Ms. Danticat. My name is Christian Taylor. I'm a graduating senior studying sociology and African studies here at Morehouse College. And before I get into my question, I want to start it off with a piece from your short story, Dosas. So you have when Gaspard says to Mona, marriage in hindsight just seems like detours, sometimes wonderful detours you take to where you need to go. So in terms of your themes of Haiti as healing and regeneration, where do you think Elise's marriage leads her to in comparison to Gaspard's marriage, who achieves the quote unquote American dream through achieving Mona, this Haitian American princess that she achieved? And what does that do to her Haitian identity in terms of healing?
Well, thank you for another wonderful question. So in that story, which is the opening story called Dosas and Everything Inside, I am indeed exploring what it means to go through generations, right? The first generation of immigrants usually are like my parents. My father worked two jobs. He always said that when he got to Brooklyn, New York, he worked one job in a car wash and another job in a glass blowing factory. He said he was always sick because he was always going between hot and cold. And one job was to pay for his life here, and another job was to send money to us in Haiti. So the first generation is usually the generation that the women are kind of in between. So the generation that's always working, and then their children who have it easier, and then the next generation, which sort of transition into sort of are no longer immigrants, really. They're descendants of immigrants. So I see, I think the women see in each other what's lost. But I'll tell you, maybe by way of an answer, what urged me to write that scene. When my mother was sick here, so my mother did live in New York and come to visit me, and then she wasn't feeling well, went to the doctor, and we found out that she had stage 4 cancer. And so she just then was with me. And whenever we would go to a hospital in Miami, the staff were Haitian caretakers, like the women in the story. And my mother would say, oh, this is why we're all here so we can take care of each other. Because her generation, you know, these women were taking care of her in another generation, but they had just arrived at the same time. So Mona is kind of what I guess everyone would want for their child. But then there are things that you miss. It's like immigration, where you have to travel for these opportunities, but then you also lose that closeness. You know, it's like some of you who are in college, like you had to leave some of you are from Atlanta, some of you are from nearby, but a lot of you probably had to travel a long way. And if we go back to another kind of migration, you know, like in the African American experience, where, you know, I've read so many of friends who would say, you know, the church had to raise the money, you know, everyone had to put together, and they were investing in this one right? And you were going to go to Morehouse, you were going to go to Spelman, you were going to go to these schools, and then just like reap that investment for everybody. So immigration is in a way like that, right? And then like where your success is not really personal, but at some point down the generations, it's more individualized. But there's a point, you know, where some are still at where it's like some of you are at, you know, at Morehouse or like that. Your first generation, you're the person in your family to go to college, or you like super legacy, but someone has invested so much in that, and you're a communal project, you know, like that, those shirts that say, I am my ancestors' wildest dream. So there are a lot of dreams like that also in the immigration experience, where so much is invested in one person, and then they're casual about it, like Mona. It's like it seems normal to them, but the people who paved the way, like, no. And then there are people who are still walking it, who just realize how valuable it is. And so those pit stops, like the detours, are sometimes horrible. The detours, or if you call them detours, that journey sometimes leaves you to the Rio Grande at the end of somebody's whip, and you're holding your child, but you're not doing that for yourself. You're like, you've gone through this Darien Gap, which is like 10 countries, through jungles. Women have been raped, people have been robbed, with a child in their arms, because it means the possibility of a better future for that child.
Hi, my name is Alexander Taylor. I'm a Morehouse Junior honor student for a business marketing major and poli-sci minor by means of Prince George's County. And I really wanted to cover one point from your book, Everything Inside Stories. I remember you used the nickname Nana for one of the first accounts, and that's my mom, my Haitian grandparents call my mother Nana, and there's a lot of other nicknames that I see being used, which remind me of, you know, the kind of colloquial, the nicknames that are used, the Creole colloquial nicknames like Tati Zoo, and, you know, those sorts of nicknames. And I was wanting to ask you, in terms of when you were writing it and trying to, you know, immerse and incorporate that type of cultural aspect into your stories, was the goal of doing so to expose the outside world to Haitian culture, or was it so that way members of the Haitian diaspora could be further connected with their roots while growing up and reading it?
Thank you. And ça passe. Well, I wanted, so when I'm writing these, and I realized when I'm writing my stories, I realized initially I was writing them for me. Like when I came here at 15 years old, I was frantically reading. So I read a lot of Haitian literature, but I also read a lot of Maya Angelou. I read Toni Morrison, I read James Baldwin. And for me, it was just sort of like they became weaved together, because I think literature, sometimes we read a book and we know the person in the book better than we know people in our own lives. I feel like literature is a bridge. Art is our ambassador. Certainly in Haiti, I feel like Haitian art, music, literature, paint, you know, visual art is our biggest ambassador. It travels into places that physically we cannot. You know, there's a Haitian proverb, parole gen pied, parole gen zèle, words have wings, words have feet. So, but then as I've gotten older, I've also feel like I'm writing for the next generations of my family. People like people like you, or people like who were hinted at in the previous, like Mona in the question, you know, in the previous question, is like, so my nieces and nephews who were, you know, now the second generation of my family born in the US, born of US born children, there's a lot that they don't know. So I feel like now I'm writing also for them, so that they can understand their grandmother, my mother, but also so that they don't, you know, that at least they'll have these stories. But I'm always aware of the dual readership, so that when I translate, like when I say parole gen pied, parole gen zèle, when I translate, I don't translate it literally, because I know there are people who are going to also know the Creole. So I try to not like double it up for them. Like I want to add nuance. So I have a book called The Dew Breaker, and the title is from an expression called chouquette la osé, which literally means shake the dew. And there were people during the dictatorship who were, you know, torturers basically. So I called it the dew breaker, like as opposed to the dew shaker, because I feel like if you know chouquette la osé, then I'd like to offer you something else in English, right? So so more and more, it's for me, of course, because I think all artists create out of a deep, profound longing for creating, but also it's a dual of, you know, there's a duality in what you're, you know, to what you're saying, also writing for the next generation, and also as a way of connecting with previous generations.
Ms. Danticat, we thank you immensely for being so generous with your time, your readings, your thoughtfulness in answering the questions of our students, and most of all, for establishing such a wonderful tradition of Caribbean literature. And I am so proud for you that you have a daughter who seems to be writing, and we look forward to her work as well. And let this not be the last time that you grace our presence, and we hope that you will join us again for the International Conference on Caribbean Literature. Thank you so much, and thank you to our students who participated.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure and an honor, and I hope we can do it in the flesh one of these days. Thank you. Merci en pile.
Oh, merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
Au revoir.